Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Option Series live stream on the ESS YouTube channel. We've got a really wonderful program for you tonight. We've got Jessica Ackerley, who's joining us live from Hawaii, in Honolulu actually. And she and I are going to watch some pre-recorded videos of her performance and discuss her work over the next hour or so. Feel free to drop any questions that you might have while watching the performance in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. But before we roll the first video, want to welcome Jessica here with us. Hey, Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement of where I'm located in Hawaii, the unceded territory of the Kanaka Maoli. And it's a real privilege to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for sharing, Jessica. All right, let's roll this first video, and we'll be back in a bit to discuss the work of Jessica Ackerley. Thank you. right, welcome back. We're here with Jessica Ackerley, who's live with us from Honolulu, Hawaii. And I always love to start these discussions off with at least a little bit of background of your work and your background as a musician. But I always love to ask folks, like, what precipitated their, descent into this type of music or choosing this kind of instrument. But first of all, just with the guitar, obviously for me, I'm a guitarist. Like, the guitar is a very loaded instrument. Like, what drew you to the instrument? Were you like really young and wanted to be a rock star? Was it something that came to you later in life? Was it like, what was like the impetus for choosing guitar as your, instrument that you predominantly use?
Definitely Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean,
that's usually what it is. It's what it was for me. So.
And then it was Led Zeppelin after that. And then Charlie Parker and Wes Montgomery in my late teens. And then from there, I just kept on going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And like, do you have either an early music memory or a later musical memory of like what perhaps dictated your gravitation towards like out music or free music? Do you remember seeing a particular performance or hearing a record that was like, that's the thing, that's where I want to go with this? Not to put you on the spot, but are there any like memories that leap out to you that are like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are pivotal records that anyone listens to through like their progress as a musician that kind of reroutes whatever path they're going down. And then there's also like musicians within the community that inspire you. For me, it started with me going to Nova Scotia for my third year. I transferred from a community college music program to finish my Bachelor of Music and Jazz Performance at a university in Nova Scotia. And I was lucky within like the first few days that I moved there, I met a saxophone player named Andrew McKelvey, who turned out to be one of like my longest collaborators. And he had just finished a summer camp with I think it's called the Creative Music Workshop in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. And it was run by the late Jerry Gonelli. Okay. Who played on he's most famous for the Charlie Brown Christmas album, but amazing free improviser, just like an incredible musician. And my friend Andrew, within the first few days, he's like, let's get together. Like, I have this monthly art gallery gig that I'm trying to get a group together for, and we're just going to play free. And I never really played free before. I was pretty straight ahead, just like playing standards for the most part. And that's what kind of did it for me, is via Andrew, through Jerry. I only met Jerry once, and I never got to play with Jerry, but Jerry was such a big community organizer in terms of more experimental music and improvised music, especially in Eastern Canada. So I definitely think, like, because of that and my friendship with Andrew, it kind of propelled me into this whole new world of improvising. In terms of records or performances, I mean, I grew up in a really rural part of Canada, in Alberta, in a small town, and I hadn't really seen much live music outside of the rock concerts and the bands that would come through Calgary and play at the hockey stadium and stuff. But in my first year, my guitar teacher that I was studying with at my community college bought me tickets to go see Bill Frisell, Tony Scher, and Joey Barron when I was 18, and he was playing in the basement of a steakhouse.
All right.
So, that was kind of like my first introduction to kind of like that modern guitar sound with like those pedals and those effects and textures that Bill gets a lot of use out of. And that was definitely like an eye-opening experience for me to see that perform live and hear all of these sonic realms that he was exploring on this electric guitar, this instrument that I played. And so I think like those were probably the two major impactful moments that kind of put me on the trajectory that I did. And then from there, I just kept on spiraling down, just like, trying to figure out that road that is where I am today.
Fantastic. Yeah, with that first piece, I really, well, first of all, I, as a guitarist, it always like piques my interest when I see someone playing the electric guitar using a clean signal and just going straight in, which is like, people don't maybe understand how brave of a maneuver that is to go fully clean. You know what I mean? It's very exposed. Myself, like, I'm always kind of anxious and terrified of pedals and exploring the realm of like putting more things in the signal chain. For me, it's just like a simplicity thing that I like. There are people that I love and respect who do it so well with pedals and effects, and I have never like taken the time to really like go down the rabbit hole, and I'm kind of afraid to. But I like always also love it when someone's just like, yeah, I'm going straight in. It's pitch, it's harmony, it's the timbre of like the clean electric guitar. I really love that. And I just wanted to ask you like about that choice for the first piece. I know we might hear some other sounds going forward in some of the next videos we're going to see tonight. But what was that decision like for you? Was that like a willful, like intentional thing, or was that just kind of like happened?
It definitely started when I was gigging a lot in New York, and I just didn't want to carry my gear. I was having like a lot of back problems, schlepping my guitar around to rehearsals and gigs and teaching and stuff. And I mean, like sometimes I would bring an overdrive pedal or a volume pedal, but beyond that, like even those, it was too much weight for me to carry, lugging it up and down the stairs and the subways and stuff. So I'm just like, okay, well, I'm just gonna plug my guitar direct into my amp and just focus on those primary building blocks of harmony, rhythm, melody, and see how much I can pull out of it and make it as musical as possible. I mean, like I spent a lot of time with pedals, and I worked in groups and projects where I use a lot of pedals, but when it came down to like playing solo, I just wanted to strip it down to the most basic essential sounds that I'm working with, which is me, my guitar, and my amplifier. And then just trying to explore and discover new things within that, because there's a lot to be said about just like doing that. And you could go on forever like that, just like you could go on forever using pedals. There are just so many options.
Absolutely. Particularly with the electric guitar and with like a solid body, like a Stratocaster or a Telecaster or, you know, whatever, like I have often found that playing solo in particular, straight in clean signal, it's really, really challenging in that it's, in my experience, really difficult to generate like depth and dimension in the sound, because it's really easy to just have this kind of like static timbre of what the electric guitar is as it's like in its purest form, which is like appealing in some way, but it also is really challenging to deal with that. And I just wanted to know like if that's something that occurs to you and how you deal with that in terms of creating space and creating like dimension and depth to your phrasing, because there's so much in that first clip that we saw. I just wanted to like ask if there is something that jumps out at you, the way that you think about that.
I like, now that you brought that up, I was thinking a lot about one of my other main influences that plays a Strat, Andrew Smiley, really amazing guitar player based in and he released an amazing solo record back in 2017. I think it's called Dispersal, and it's just a 27-minute solo guitar track of just vocals and his Stratocaster. And I think he might have a distortion pedal. He must. I can't remember. I haven't listened to it in a while. But one thing that blew me away with that recording was just how much texture and sound and density and that contrast and the varying degrees of exploring that sparseness to the most dense parts of just chords, but like not even like just like audible harmony melodies that he is singing, and every once in a while he'll like play a little melody, but he just gets these crazy pitches that just sound like clusters. of noise, but it's very musical, and he's really effective in terms of like the placement of it and the rhythmic variation of it. And I think that I drew a lot from that when listening to his recording, and then going and applying my own practice, and like trying to figure out what I want to do on a Stratocaster playing solo guitar. And then outside of that, another recording that I can think of that does a similar thing but on acoustic guitar is Joe Morris's Singularity.
Absolutely.
Which is a brilliant album. It's just him with acoustic guitar, and there's so much stuff going on. So I've spent a lot of time with that recording too, and listening to it, and then just like thinking about like the concepts he's applying and the ideas that he's applying to have that variation, and give it that kind of compositional structure, even though it's all improvised. I think it's all improvised. I don't know. He probably came up with concepts and ideas before going into playing it, but yeah, I think like between those two recordings and just sitting with them for long periods of time, and then just sitting down with an instrument and just playing a ton and recording myself and editing my playing through listening back, keeping what I liked and what I didn't like, and what was working and what was not working, and then just kind of really refining it from there, and also just developing like my own language, I think is really important as well, because if you're sitting down with this instrument, you can get bored very easily just sitting and playing the same thing. So your mind tends to wander, and then from there you kind of find cool ideas that you probably wouldn't have happened upon unless you restricted yourself or limited yourself with just sitting down with your instrument and playing.
Absolutely. That kind of leads to another big question I wanted to ask you, which is like the anxiety of the idiom of the guitar, right? Is like, it's an instrument that has been used for, about 100 years now, with very specific like genre implications a lot of times, in terms of, it's like how if someone picks up a saxophone, frequently people are just going to assume it's jazz, like no matter what the music ends up sounding like. The guitar can often fall into that in terms of like rock music or any other type of like very idiomatic stylistic thing. So like, as a guitarist who improvises and exists in this kind of like out free music realm that is kind of fighting against this idiomatic concept of what the guitar is, like, how do you deal with pulling from like the idiom of like what the guitar has been historically, and like pushing against that? Is that something that you're super conscious of all the time, or not?
I definitely think so. I mean, I think like when it comes down to kind of drawing from the lineage of guitar and like the guitar sound and what the guitar can do, I think the reason why I go the opposite against that oftentimes is because I'm not like a really diligent guitar student. Like I'll go and like I'll study someone and I'll try to learn stuff, but then it either is too hard or I can't play it exactly the way they play it, and then I just get frustrated and kind of give up, and then just kind of go do my own thing. And then for some reason, just even spending that portion of time, even if it didn't work out the way that I was hoping it would in terms of internalizing or ingraining some of what they're playing that they were doing into like what I'm trying to do. It definitely, there's some sort of osmosis and morphing of the concepts that I'm learning, and then it kind of comes out the other end the way that I interpret it. Mm-hmm. So I think like that process is really cool.
Yeah, for me, I too have like I identify with a lot of the things you do. But as someone who has like spent now a decade plus trying to like fight against the predictive like obvious guitar tropes in like either improvising or in other, even in rock music, in quarantine, one of my obsessions was like kind of getting back into the idiom and like learning like classic rock riffs and solos and stuff. And it was a very silly exercise for me that it was really fun and just kind of like a new, different thing for me. But it's always just such a mind melting proposition to try to deal with the problem of the guitar, because there's so much that is like baked in there.
There are guitarists that are like really good at learning how to play the guitar and learning like stylistic elements and executing it really well. And like there's a lot to be said about craft. I just don't think I'm a good crafts person. I
feel you.
I just kind of and then I just get too distracted because I'll find something, I'm like, oh, this is cool, and then I'll just go off with it and do my own thing with it, which is totally cool too. I think like and it also comes back to like balance between the two, and as long as you're working on both and like both, like you can take a break from one thing for a while and just go off and do the other thing and then take a break and go back to the other thing. I think like that process and giving yourself time and being patient with yourself to kind of develop that into your own playing is really crucial to like keep on moving forward with what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Breaking down elements of language as they've existed and creating a new guitar language. It's what we're all trying to do, right? It's a brilliant thing, when we can figure it out. All right, let's take a look at this second performance here. I know this one's a little different. It uses a less clean signal and explores a lot more varied sonic territory. So yeah, let's roll the second clip and we'll be back in a moment with Jessica Ackerley. Thanks, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're here with Jessica Ackerley, discussing her work. We've got some really awesome questions in the chat that I would like to pose to Jessica. First from Patrick Shiroishi, favorite Hendrix album? This one's a loaded one. Answer carefully.
I am all about the Jimi Hendrix live recordings. I mean, like, I love his studio records, but my favorite is the Band of Gypsies live at Fillmore East. It's
that was always a huge one for me.
Yeah. And I love the Band of Gypsies. I mean, like, I love Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, but for me, like, those live recordings in those later years after the Jimi Hendrix Experience broke up and he put together Band of Gypsies, like, that was it for me for sure.
Yeah, the recording of Changes on that record for me, that was my song for a long period of time. That's a great record. We've got another question from EI Jimmy in the chat. Do you have any particular approaches or philosophies around practicing?
It always changes for me. I go through phases. It depends. I mean, for the longest period of time, especially when I was in my 20s, I was just trying to get my technique together and get a sense of where everything laid on the fretboard. So that was like about 5 or 10 years of just practicing right there. And then from there, the past few years, I just made this decision that I wanted to try to play everything by ear and just not really think about all that time that I spent on in terms of like theoretical concepts or anything like I did when I was younger, trying to learn where the notes laid and everything. And that kind of also led into like my decision to really just lean into playing free and working with free improvisers. So a lot of my practice time these days is like ear training and just trying to focus on what I'm hearing in my head and just have no filter between what's going on here and it being translated down here on the fretboard. And then also just like I've been taking singing lessons with Jen Shu, trying to learn how to like sing everything that I'm playing too. And I think one of the amazing things about the guitar, getting back to Jimi Hendrix, is like the way that he can make like the guitar sing. And yeah, I think like a lot of my time is trying to spend hearing what's going on in my head and translate it into something that is very human. And the way it's executed. And I think like one of the most human things you can use is the human voice, obviously. So yeah, that's like a majority of my practice time these days.
That's wonderful. That's such a huge hump to get over as a guitarist too, because we're like dealt with this, like it's really like a graphic interface to deal with pitch, right? And it's like, okay, this is totally not the way that like the human voice behaves, or any kind of like even like fretless string instruments where there's a little bit more capability for like gesture and blurring lines, but everything is so like, or can be so graphical on the guitar until you find the ways around that. But yeah, that's so critical to just like find the way to eliminate that barrier between like what you are hearing. Yeah.
That's a lot of my practice time right now. And I mean, it's different for every person. I think like maintenance is really important, and daily maintenance with like just keeping up with your facility and your technique. But outside of that, like everyone's at a different stage and going down a different path. And it's one of those things where like only you know what's going to be best and most suitable for you to focus on. And like you're playing in that moment. And sometimes it could just be just like not even doing anything, just taking a break for a while, or learning another instrument, or picking up like a hobby, or going and hanging out with friends. I think like making sure that you're not focusing on what other people are doing in terms of measuring yourself to where they're at, and just being really aware of what you need, and what's gonna also just like bring you most joy when you sit down with your instrument too. And I know especially coming up in music schools when I was younger, they didn't really instill that in you. They just like, you got to play. You have like all these tests to pass, and that's also been part of my practice routine, is unlearning all of that from like a mental headspace too.
100%. Absolutely.
And that's kind of something that when I sit down, like I'll work on stuff and I'll work on ideas that kind of go back to that previous formal training that I had, but like I'll go back and like try to attach some sort of emotion to it. Like, how does the sound make me feel, or how does this melody make me feel right now? How many ways can I make it feel differently outside of that? And just like attaching some sort of emotion to it, because a lot of the times, like, practice can feel very sterile and not enjoyable. And I just don't want to be in a place right now with my instrument where I'm not enjoying it, especially with everything that's been going on this year. It's just like, if we're not finding pleasure in what we're doing, why are we doing it?
What's the point? Yeah,
yeah.
That's so critical. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's so deep and important to always center. We have another question from the great Daniel Leitch. How do you think about tone and timbre regarding guitar and amp settings, volume EQ, when going straight clean into the amp?
Well, I bought a new amp over the quarantine. Last summer I bought this vintage Tone Master amp, which is actually meant for a pedal steel guitar, and it doesn't even have a reverb on it. It just has a volume and then a master volume, and then that's it.
Wow.
And then it's a tube amp, so I just go in and I just deal with it. And I mean, like, I could probably spend some time sitting down and really like honing in and dialing my tone like other guitar players. Like, sometimes I listen back and I'm like, oh man, like my Stratocaster is sounding really thin right now, or it's too bright, or it's too shoestringy. But yeah, I don't know. It's not really something that I spent too much time doing. And also that goes back to like gigging, like all those years that I lived in New York. You show up and you're just dealing with the amp at the venue.
Yeah.
And just plug in and you're like, okay, this is how it's gonna be, and you just gotta go with it.
Absolutely. We've got one more question that I see here from the chat from Zachary Ide. Zachary says, I'm curious about the album Jessica did with Daniel Carter. I'm curious to know how that collaboration came about and process to make the music on that album.
Yeah, Daniel. I met Daniel in 2000. I want to say 2019 or 2018. He was playing the third iteration of Secret Project Robot in Bushwick. And that was the first time that I went up and I introduced myself to him. And Daniel's wonderful. Like, New York loves Daniel. He's just such an amazing artist in person. And from there, like, we set up a couple sessions, I think like 2 or 3 sessions at my rehearsal space. And then I think the pandemic hit, and because I was living in Manhattan, I didn't have, all my friends live in Brooklyn or Queens or uptown, so I didn't really have any social bubble. It was just like me and my husband and my cat. And then I knew Daniel lived downtown, so I would walk down from 23rd Street, 2nd Avenue, all the way down to City Hall because I didn't want to take the subway. And me and him would just get together once a week and play in the park during the summer. And I would play acoustic guitar and he'd bring his horns and we'd just hang out and talk. And it was just nice to have companionship with being so isolated in the midst of everything that was going on with COVID. And then when I was getting ready to move to Honolulu, I told Dan, like, we have to record something. We have to like capture this before I go because I don't know when I'm coming back. And he was super down to just go and track a couple hours of improvisation with me at Skull Street Studio in Brooklyn. And yeah, it was just a real honor to be able to record that with him and just capture that period of time and that friendship that we had built throughout the pandemic. And yeah, I just love Daniel so much. I love playing with him because he really listens, but I also just love hanging out and talking to him, and I'm just really lucky that I got to do that.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for the great question, Zachary. Before we're done tonight, I just wanted to ask if you have any projects upcoming that you're super excited about, like what you've been working on lately since you've been in Honolulu, and like what exciting stuff you've got coming up.
Yeah, I was lucky to start a few pandemic bands. I started a new trio with a fantastic piano player named Eli Wallace and Frank Meadows, a bass player, who are both based in New York. So we're going to have our full length out early next year, hopefully. And then my other quintet project that's coming out next year is with Patrick Shiroishi, Chris Williams, Luke Stewart, and Jason Nazary. We have a full length coming out on 577 Records.
Both unreal bands. Wow.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then my final one is actually Nick Turner from Chicago. He's a really amazing ambient guitar player and musician, and Chaz Primack. We did a minimalist ambient remote recording that is currently in the mixing stages right now. So hopefully that will be out sometime later next year. And then outside of that, I've just been hanging out here. I took up painting, so this over here is the painting that I've been working on, and yeah, just trying to work on taking in every day and just trying to enjoy life and kind of just take it as it goes.
You are like unbelievably prolific. That's wild. You have so many like incredible groupings that you are like working on, and also like, yeah, all of the different improvised music groups and your band ESSi, and it just like there's so much wonderful things happening. I implore everyone tuning in tonight to just check out all of Jessica's music. Before we roll the third video here and call it a night, I just wanted to ask if you want to preface this last performance at all, or introduce it in any way.
Yeah. So the guitar player that's in this next video, his name's Shane Parrish. He was originally from Richmond and recently moved to Georgia. I can't remember where he moved to, but he came out to Kauai. So I live in Oahu, and Kauai is the next island over. Mm-hmm. And it's literally like riding the subway from Manhattan to Brooklyn. Like you get on the flight, you go up and you go down. And he told me he was going to be there, and me and my husband hadn't been on a vacation in like over 2 years. So we're like, oh, let's just go. We'll just go island hopping, and I'll bring my guitar with me. And Shane I never met him before. I only know him through the internet. He was super cool. We just met up with our guitars, and then we just drove around the island, just capturing different improvisations. So this is an excerpt of us with a bunch of chickens by a blowhole.
That's amazing. Also, shout out to Shane. Shane's wonderful.
Yeah, Shane's incredible
friend of the
guitar
program.
player.
Great. Yeah, before we roll that third video, I just wanted to thank you, Jessica, for joining us tonight. It's been so wonderful to meet you over the internet and chat for the last hour.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone at ESS Chicago for all of the amazing work that you've been doing all these years, and especially in the pandemic with providing these broadcasts online for everyone to watch. It's been really incredible seeing all the artists that you're supporting, and it's wonderful work that you all are doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Always love to have folks tuning into these programs. So without any further ado, here's a duo between Jessica Ackerley and Shane Parrish. Enjoy, everyone. Good night.